Hi, and welcome to Woots Talk, the podcast of the International Woots Society. Today, your hosts are Tim, it's me, I'm the Society President, and Jin from Woots Militaria, who is our historical officer. Welcome, Jin.
Hi, Tim.
The topics we're going to be covering today are going to be where these are questions about Woots. So, this is the first episode, episode 1, Woots and its patenting questions. And the questions we're going to cover are: where did the name Woots come from? What did it look like? And how did different cultures describe Woots? So let's just start off with that first question. So, where did the name Woots come from? The first example that we have of Woots, the first time the word was used, was by Helena Scott in Bombay in 1794. And he mentioned this steel called Woots. And he said, I enclosed in one of the boxes a specimen of a kind of steel which is called Woots, and it was very highly esteemed amongst the locals. And in Trade Card, this is the one that you're talking about, isn't it, Jen? Trade
That's
Card
right.
by
Yeah.
James Stoddart. And
Yeah,
you can
that's
see
right. Yeah.
this
You can
word
see that.
here, Woots.
Yeah, if you zoom into that a little bit, Tim, it's quite important to know, right? Okay, so just for the listeners, it's important to understand that this is written in a native language, right? And we know that this is from Mumbai or Bombay, right?
Correct.
Bombay as it used to be known, and it's Mumbai as it's known today, right?
That's
And
right.
in that language, in that region or in that city and sub-region, the main language is Marathi, and
Yes.
the script here is Marathi. And I haven't got the data to hand, but I know that even now the largest majority language being spoken in Mumbai is Marathi still, and it's this particular language.
Right.
So the language being used is related to the particular place the trade card came from, and Helena Scott mentioning it all ties up really, really well.
Correct.
But what's really important is the way it's been written, right? It's been written correctly. I mean, it pronounces Uts. Exactly. There you go. You've got that. So Devnagari or Marathi, right? Marathi. It'd probably be the most accurate, but it is a similar script. So my ancestral language is Punjabi, right? But the script is very similar to this, and you have uts with the s at the end, right? But it's been pronounced so it could have been slightly well, it's the same we pronounce it, right? Even if you speak to Smiths today,
right?
I speak to Smith in North America, Smith in Europe, or Smith in the UK. We all slightly pronounce Woots slightly different. Okay,
Right.
Even collectors, anti-collectors, even though we all accept Woots to be a term that we all use for watered steel blades or items, right? But we even now today we know how that's spelt in the English language, but yet we still pronounce it slightly different to each other. So I think that was just coincidental, but I think it's very, very important for the listeners to know that this narrative that's been set for the past, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 years, maybe longer, I'm not sure, where Uts is corruption of Ruku, from the Tamil language or some of the southern languages. I don't believe that's the case, right? And the more we delve into this, the more I think more people will realize.
Yeah, because you got the this is the oo sound. With it, can you describe what this extra?
So if it was the oo, it's giving the sound of oo, so it's extending the sound. So oo.
So
like
without that bottom tail, it would be
it wouldn't be
like an
it'd be a totally different sound altogether. Yeah.
Not
So the oo, so the double O that you see in Woots is coming from that bottom bit there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then we have the t.
And then the yeah, that's a clear. So anybody watching this video who understands the northern Indic languages, right? Indian languages, they know that they'll clearly identify this last letter, and they'll also probably understand the sounds that the oo's making as well. So yeah.
Right.
So you can see the word itself has been written by somebody local. right? And the
Right.
other important thing is, it's there's a possibility that this was stamped, right? Because
Correct. Yes, it could have been
it
like
was
a
stamped.
wood stamp or something like that.
Yeah, so there's
Yeah,
plenty of opportunity to correct something that was miswritten. So,
absolutely.
the British in India, they were very good at documenting and auditing and cataloging things, much better than the locals, I would have
Yes,
thought. But
they were. Well, here's the letters as shown. You see
yeah,
the
yeah,
yeah, the oo and the oo sound
that's right.
shown, and this is from a British produced grammar from I think the 1800s. Marathi language, official language of the Maharashtra state. So this was, you can see those. It was actually from this book, and let's see right there. And this is another way that they would have presented that as well in the top right-hand corner there. So let me just zoom in on that. You can see this. This is a modified version of it. So, but it's the same letter, same character. So, and it's interesting. This word is used in Sanskrit, Marathi, Hindi, Bengali, Gujarati, Kannada, Malayalam, Telugu,
Malayalam,
and others. Forgive my poor pronunciation for those who know better.
yeah.
And the interesting thing is about where does the w sound come from? People might ask. Well, you've got the oo sound, but in coastal areas, in some dialects, they would actually, instead of pronouncing it oo, it would be woo. And well, Bombay is a coastal area, so it's highly likely that that's where the w came from instead of the oo or the oo sound. But interestingly, the term, what it means, when I was looking this up and really studying it heavily, it's interesting to see that both this and aruku have similar core meanings. And this oots itself, woots, it means, it's talking about a spring or a fountain, a place of waters, and also euphemistically used as clouds. But there's always this running water type of description, and I'm definitely not of. Some people say that it was called that because when a cake fails, when you put it in a furnace and you heat it up to a point where it fails, water or like a liquid will ooze out. But firstly, if they're going to be doing that, firstly, you don't name something after a failure state. Secondly, if that was the case, we've got to consider they weren't doing it in a gas furnace here like we would do in a gas forge. They were doing it in charcoal. When an ingot fails in charcoal, you don't see liquid oozing out. So there's no way in my mind that could be the case. But
No,
anyway,
you wouldn't name something on failures, right? And if it was such a failure prone, failure prone production process, and I'm gonna say it's lightly because production processes were very unique to people, regional, and so on. But it just wouldn't. You wouldn't. We know by history the amount of by not nationalistic accounts. So let's ignore what the Indians say about the Indians, but let's see what the British say about the accounts they've seen, or the anthropologists or the Persians say about Indian watered steel, right, or watered steel ingots. Yep. So and you see a lot about, you read a lot about I see a lot of accounts about the steel being exported out, and if it wasn't a successful process, well, it wouldn't have lasted as long as it did, and it wouldn't be exported the way it is, because it has to be a surplus. You got to understand, right?
Correct.
That you have to understand one thing, that wood steel, regardless it being just a steel, an ingot, or eventually a billet or a blade, right? But before it becomes a weapon, it has the possibility of becoming anything, and most likely a weapon. Yes. So it's how we treat arms production today, right? Enriching uranium and things like this, right? Well, right. If you're going to supply wood steel to other nations, other kingdoms, you must have had enough yourself. You must have enough of it yourself, right? So the steel production would have been plentiful for the local kingdoms and the local security before it was exported out. So that's something that people really need to understand, that you wouldn't really name it on its failures, because I think the failures would have been a lot less than the successes, because the production exports were so high.
Considering that it did actually produce a pattern that looks like water, like running water, from a spring or from a fountain, that the kind of the running water, light shining off running water, it makes logical sense. But interesting, talking about that, let's go back to this to the board here.
Yeah,
we have in Tamil the word uku, the root uku, seems to infer moving water, because urukan, also uruk, uk. I did a lot of digging into this, and we won't talk about it heavily here, but there are a lot of words. There are equivalent words in the Dravidian and equivalent words in the Sanskrit, root words. And you've got the or you are, or you've got the uk sound, which are equivalent to the ut sound, and in these different languages. So where that came from, I don't know. But when you do study all these words quite heavily in their roots, you can see there is a connection. And they also talk about melting, water flowing, a spring, a fountain. It's quite remarkable. It's a very interesting study that I did not too long ago. So now for words for crucible steel.
Just one thing, Tim. Yep. So just mention, just for clarity, because you mentioned Dravidian and Sanskrit.
Yes.
Dravidian, just for the listeners, Dravidian is more southern languages, like the deep south of India. And they're mainly Dravidian languages, and the other side of languages. So the similar script to what you see on the trade card is northern or Sanskrit origin. There's a whole argument around Tamil being the oldest, and it probably is older than Sanskrit.
Yes.
But and I don't want to get into that because that's unrelated to what we're talking about. But it's important to understand the languages. So they're very, very different, right? Very, very different language, right? So the person who was calling the southern Indian talking to a northern Indian, language would be totally different, probably almost impossible to communicate, right? Now in India, the common language is actually English, right? The common language between the kingdoms in ancient times, in historical India and beyond, was actually Persian. So the state language, the statesmanship, or the language between kingdoms, which is English today, was actually Persian back in the day, right? So this is where we start seeing Persian creeping in, right, to Indian languages, because the rulers would be communicating in Persian, be it a Hindu king of a particular type, or a Muslim king of a particular type, or even a Sikh, or even a Buddhist ruler of some sort, right? They would eventually start using Persian as the language to communicate between kingdoms.
Sure. Very interesting. Now, why don't you cover quickly these words, Jin?
Yeah. Okay. So these are a bunch of words being used for roots over the ages, right? So this video might be too long for this video, but so Polad and Folad is pretty much the same thing. The reason why there's a f in Folad, and we use Folad. My ancestral region in northern India, we use Folad and roots interchangeably, right? But Folad in Arabic language, there is no P. They don't pronounce the word P. That's why I've got Arab friends who say Pakistan instead of Pakistan, right? Because they don't have that sound in their language. So Folad most likely came about because of the trade happening, or the links between Middle East, right? In Persia, it would have been Polad, maybe Folad as well in some regions, but it's pretty much the same thing. I don't think we need to spend too much time on that. Folad, Pollard is very, very similar. Bolat Bolat is always something that I was always understood and always told that Bolat was just a slightly mispronunciation of Pollard, right? So Pollard, and Bolat, right? Very, very similar. Wootz, we know Wootz is like the de facto standard for watered steel. We won't go into chemistries and what is Wootz and what isn't Wootz right now. We can talk about that another time. Yes. But Hindwan and Hindwani is means that it's from Al Hind. Al Hind means the Indian or the Indian blade. So Hindwani, Hindwan, and Al Hind you'll see in the old scripts, the old manuscripts. So going back to Al Biruni, Al Biruni, and Al, what's his other name? Guy's name?
Al-Kindi.
Al-Kindi, yeah, that's right. Yeah, Al-Kindi, yeah. So you'll see those references. So when they're talking about Al Hind, Hind was an ancient name, an ancient term for India. Okay, it was used back in the day. Right, so Hindu similar to how people are called Hindu, right? Gohardar or Johardar can be interchangeably used as well. Johar means the pattern, or gem, sometimes used as the quality or the breed of the steel. But in general, in today's terms, you can use that one. And Johardar, so somebody who makes wood steel could be classed as a Johardar Smith or Johardar, somebody who does that. Uruku, same thing again, what the steel was known as down south of India. One thing we missed here is Irumbu. Irumbu is another southern Indian Tamil word. Irumbu is mainly for iron, and then we have Damascus steel, which everybody knows, right? Which Damascus steel, we can talk about where it came from, how it was changed, and everything else, but I don't want to get into that. There's one term we're missing on here, and that's Farhand. Farhand is the term that was used before Johar. So in ancient India / Middle East, I don't know, regional, massive regions, before they used to say this is Foulad and this is the Johar, meaning this is the patterning that you have on this particular steel. They wouldn't use Johar. Before Johar, they used Farhand or Farhand. And that's the term they used to use. And you see that in some of the old manuscripts as well. Before the term Johar. Right. The term Johar comes a little bit later. So that's something important to understand. So nowadays, we typically use Johar as the Johar meaning watering, the pattern, Johar. And Foulad and Pollard and Bolat and Wootz, and we can use any of those terms really. But that's another discussion altogether.
Sure, absolutely. All right, let's move on to question 2. What did Wootz look like? So there are various different examples. It wasn't just one. Didn't have just one appearance. So let's just have a quick look at that.
Okay.
So now we'll be covering a few people who talked about it, eyewitnesses at the time, original accounts describing, hey, this is what we saw, this is what they were doing. So the first one we'll cover is this guy, Dr. Voysey, who is an interesting character. Most of these people who wrote about this in English were just interested parties, people who had worked there for the British military or for industry. They were interested in the anthropology, and they went around talking to people, writing about what they saw. Some of them, their interests were in mineralogy, others in industrial processes, and they recorded what they saw. So he was one that recorded the process in Golconda at the time, and he said that the steel is known by the name of Wootz in Talinga. Now, Talinga is basically what we would call today the region of Hyderabad. And so he made an interesting comment. He said, the export of this metal to Persia must be profitable, for we found in the village in 1820 Haji Hossein from Isfahan engaged in the speculation. Here again in 1823, he informed us that the place and the process were both familiar to the Persians and that they have attempted to imitate the latter without success. Now, so there was something about the process here that the Persians had tried to replicate, and they were unable to do it. We can get into why that was later on, because the Persians themselves were making crucible steel, weren't they?
Yeah. We can't just say India was the only place that watered steel was being made, right? We know it was being made in parts of Persia. You know, you heard terms of Khorasan and other regions, right?
Yes.
As far as Uzbekistan, right?
Right.
Even sometimes under the Persians, right? So yeah, we can't. I don't want to take anything away from the Persians, because the Persians did make wood steel, but the production in India seems to be the largest production industry. Well, almost hitting industrial level production of steel being exported out, and this is again by, you know, you have to be careful what you listen to, because there's people who are nationalistic on all sides of wood steel or historical facts and archaeology, and in all countries, not just India, right? So you have to talk factual and talk evidence, right? And these people you're referencing here, they have no association to, and they don't have any allegiance to India as a country, right? Right? Or the historical. So what they're saying is what they see. It's fact, right? So you know, you have to take nationalistic opinion with a pinch of salt. But what these guys are saying, you can, you know, it's anthropology, right? They're sharing what they see, right? And just going back to Telinga. Telinga is that specific place, right? Golconda was a kingdom, not just Hindu kings, but also Muslim kings, right? In Golconda, right? And they like Bidri work. Bidri is another type of technique of I don't want to say similar to Koftkari, but similar, but a lot of oxidizing and of non-ferrous metal, right? And that was really famous in that region as well, right? And we know that region had links to Persia and other places, right? We know that from other anthropologists. So Telinga is quite an important word. We're going to see that later on in some of the other research. So that's really, really important thing to remember.
All right. So yeah, the Indians were in charge of the process, not the Persians. Some people have said, well, the Persians were in charge. No, this guy was coming here, and he was basically doing quality control, but the Indians were in charge. They were running it. The Persians couldn't do it themselves, but he wanted to ensure the quality of the material that he was getting, so he double-checked everything, which is also very interesting. And these were the ingots that they were producing at that location. This is from Konasamudram. There was recently a cache of ingots found, 60 ingots, which is just a remarkable thing. I was looking for original ingots some years ago, and there were none to be found. And then they came up and they found this, and they've been doing analysis of these. Meghna Desai and her group, they're doing wonderful work on this particular find. So this is the ingot. That's what it looks like in cross-section. So this was actually a drawing which was done by Abbott. Major Abbott, I think it was Major James Abbott. Here we go, this guy up here. So he was a very, very keen sword collector. He went up to Russia, had a very interesting account of his journey, which he wrote in a book called Narrative. And so he described afterwards that he went to Gujarat, and there was a smith there who he had make up a sword for him. And he said this cast steel, which is foulard, is purchased at Amritsar in the Punjab, small cakes. What's that?
Amritsar in Punjab, yeah.
Amritsar, yeah, in the small cakes above noted. The natives know not its origin, but only that it comes from the south, and it can be purchased at Delhi in large as well as small cakes. So very, very interesting that they were calling it foulard, and that it was also that it came from the south. And this is what was known as woots, according to Voisey, in Telinga, it was in the local language. They called it woots in that region. So it's called woots in Telinga and foulard in Gujarat.
Yeah,
that is something very important to remember. That
Gujarat is quite a distance away from Hyderabad, right? It's a long way.
Yes.
Now I can't tell you exactly without checking on a map or something, but it's a long distance. You're talking, India's a massive place. It's not a small country. Well, it wasn't even a country to begin with. It was multiple countries now merged into what's on India today, right?
That's
so
a very good point.
Gujarat, the language is different. The writing script is different. The culture is very different. The environment is very different. And Gujarat is closer towards um, um, it's getting closer to the borders of India, right? Of what we see India as a subcontinent today. So it's very, very important.
Exactly, yeah, no, it is, and that's a very very significant thing. A lot of people, they think of India, they think of it as one nation, but it's important
No.
to understand the very complex history of the continent.
Yeah, it's really, really important to understand, because there's plenty of documentation, plenty of historical manuscripts, references to treaties between states, especially when the British come to India. When the British came to India, and this is going into why the decline of Wootz film, that's a different story altogether. But when the British came to India, when you allied with the British told you who you can and cannot trade with. So who you were supplying charcoal to, you could no longer supply charcoal to. Who you were trading arms with, or grains, or food, or water, you could no longer do that unless they allied with the British as well. So things like that happened, and that wasn't uncommon. That was happening before the British came as well, because there was various kingdoms and various alliances. Even if you look at Rajasthan, or Rajputana as it was known, Rajasthan had multiple mini kingdoms. Some were allied with the Mughals. One or two of them just didn't stand that, right? So so there's kind of fractures in the society, regardless of religion, caste, or creed. Sometimes there was a lot of common ground there. The kingdoms were very much separate. People wanted their own rule and had their own kingdoms, and that included trade boundaries as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. It's very, very important to understand a bit of historical context there.
Yeah.
So let's move on to question 3 here. So how did different cultures describe Wootz? Now that we're talking about different cultures and kingdoms. So let's go over to that. And there were various different this is one from 1675. We probably should say here that, for those who aren't aware, steel from India, Hindwani, Wootz, Al-Hind, as they called it. The name changed the further you go back. Sometimes it was telling steel, sometimes it was there were several different names, but that steel, the earliest account that we have dates, and I'm not saying that this is where the beginning of it, but it dates it back to at least 100 BC. And so back to the reign of King Philip of Macedonia, the last one. It could have been one of the earlier ones. It doesn't say, but we have it going back at least that far. So there's at least 2,000 years of making steel in India. Whether it created a pattern or not, back that very early stage, I would say most likely. But do we have people talking about it back in the pattern back that far? No, we don't. Not at this point. So, but somewhere along the line, it did. The Persians talked about it back then, saying that, hey, it came from India, and we've improved the process. So it predates that time. So it's important. There's a lot of dialogue which is going on throughout history, talking about the steel from India, the steel from Persia, which one's good, which one's not, etc. So this here, Tavernier, was, I believe, French traveler who was a diamond jewel gem merchant, and he wrote about his travels through the region. And in this case, he said the Persians know perfectly well how to damask with the vitriol, which is iron sulfate, like swords, knives, and similar things, but the nature of the steel they use contributes lots, because they cannot do the same with their steel, nor with our steel. This steel is a prize of Golconda. Remember, that's the kingdom where Tavernier, which Voici was, we were just talking about there. This steel is a prize of Golconda, and it's the only one which can make a good damask. So there was something peculiar about that steel in creating the pattern. Now, we have to realize some people could read this and say, oh, well, that means the other stuff didn't create a pattern. That's not what he's saying here. He is rating the quality of the pattern and saying that This one is the only one that really makes a very, very good pattern. And so we need to realize that. Do you have any comments about that, Jin?
Yeah, I mean, look, he uses the term, but the nature of the steel they use contributes lots because they cannot do the same with their steel, right? I think what he's talking about there, the nature of the steel is the chemistry, right? Or the maybe the solidification structure, or how it's done, right? I mean, look, right, the Tavernier would have been seeing these blades, right? And you start comparing them, right? You start comparing these patterns and things like this, because realistically, if you're demasking something, he has given credit to the Persians on top of that paragraph, right?
Yep.
Which he knows that they can. It's demasking the steel, right? It's got a lovely damask pattern, a water pattern, whatever you want to call it. But for some reason, he rates the Golconda steel better, which, if I was a betting man, we know the massive production, the biggest production, regardless of where in the world, right? Regardless of Ottoman Turkey, Mamluk Egypt, or Middle East or Persia, or wherever we want to talk about, right? We know that the production was stupidly huge in India, right? And the biggest production region was that region.
Yes.
Right. So the sheer amount of testing, discussion, trade, competition there would have been huge, right? So it doesn't surprise me that that's his comments, because if the production level was that huge, regardless of how good it was then, they must have gone through a lot of trial and error to get to that stage. Maybe decades or centuries of trial and error, but they did something right.
Yes.
And they, so much so that the steel was being exported. We don't actually have those accounts, right? I've never seen an account. I don't recall an account of any steel being imported into India, watered steel. I've never come across an account, which is interesting, right?
I haven't either.
I've never come across an account of steel being traded into India, watered steel. You see plenty of accounts of wood steel, watered steel, Falad, whatever you want to call it, being traded out of India. You see plenty of accounts. Like we've just seen a couple in these videos, right? But you never, which is interesting, right? I've never thought about that, but I've never seen an account, which is interesting, right? Because the Persians have been trading with India since pre-Islamic period of Persia. So
I've read a lot of accounts of trade in different parts of India, from different parts of Persia, because people wrote lists. During the 1800s, they wrote lists of the trade going up the Silk Road, etc. And I don't recall any high quality steel coming back into India. So it's interesting. Let's go on to what else he says. It's interesting what else he says about this. He said the steel which we call Damasteel comes from the Indies, and the Persians call it Johadar, which you talked about earlier.
Which is so this is a good term. This term is carried on today. I mean, I still use this term all the time. So I say Johar Dar Falad, or Johar Wali Falad, or it's basically just an inverse of this, right? So Falad Johar Dar, or Johar Dar Falad. It means steel with it means a steel, and Falad was used. And this, I'm going to be careful what I say here because I don't want to confuse anybody. But technically, Falad could be used for steel in general as well, right? But the Tavernier is specifically using the term Johadar to make sure that people understand it has a pattern.
Watered steel. That's correct. Yeah, and we put the Falad Johadar there not because that was the term that he actually wrote in his writings. It's that is the term that they in Persia, when they say Johadar, they would say Falad Johadar. So now also another word, Hindwani, which was mentioned earlier. Wootz was also known as Hindwani in the Arab countries, who reportedly claimed it had no parallel in the world. This goes back to the whole thing. It was an excellent steel. In several Arab accounts, we hear the terms Hindvi and telling swords, which is telling as in Telinga, which were highly prized and were manufactured using Dakani Wootz. Now, Dakani just means south.
Southern India, but telling swords means tellinger. So they're using region. They're using regional terms. Yeah, they're using region. They're using terms that refer to a region, right? So
correct.
Hindwani, Hindavi, Hindwa, Al Hind means region in India, right? Because
Yes.
some people you talk to, they wouldn't know. They wouldn't know Telinga, they wouldn't know Golconda, right?
Right.
They wouldn't know these regions, right? You speak to somebody in, say, I don't know, Western Persia, right? They wouldn't know what that place was, right? But maybe somebody on the borders of Khorasan in India, they may have a chance to know what these guys are talking about. But they've used all the terms here, right? This is Fubak, right? So the terms like telling, we know that specific region, and we know where that we've just talked about that in the previous videos or earlier in this video. Hindavi, we know it's referring to India, and Deccani or Dakhan, like we say Dakhan or Deccani, how they say it, it just means southern India.
Yeah,
the Deccan, region.
This is Anne Fubak wrote this about in her research on Hindwani, and yeah, so she's the one who's saying basically the telling swords, etc. That's Tilinga, which is in the Deccan region, also known as Deccani, which is Hyderabad, which is Golconda. Yeah, these are names of the same kingdom.
This is Konsamadram. Yeah, Konsamadram would also be that same place.
Exactly. Konsamadram is a town in that region which was well known for its production of this material, and that's where Voisey went and visited. But that was also they were making telling steel there. So let's go over here. What else did they have to say about it in Persia? So, okay, this is see, I'm not sure. This is, I think, 8th century. Don't quote me on that. It's old. And Fubak also quoted this guy, Fakir-i Mudabir, further identifies several varieties of Hindi sword whose names are not really readily identified. Jin, why don't you take this?
All right. Okay. Right. Okay. So this author, it's based on an old manuscript, right? So she's it's Fubak, right? So she's referencing the kitab or manuscript from this particular author, and so it further identifies several varieties of Hindi swords whose names are not readily identifiable. The most costly and choicest of them all was the one called Moji Darya. Right, so the translation here is a little bit weird because Darya doesn't mean sea. Darya means river or river. Yeah, it means river, right? Darya, right? It means river. Waves of the sea, river. So yeah, you got river there in brackets. That's probably the correct translation. Identifying the watering of the blade. He also mentions that all the other varieties that he had named, none were made outside India. Moreover, the Hindi sword possessed the hardest blades of all swords. The best among them all was the Hindi sword and the most lustrous Johadar Darafar. I don't know what that end word means. I'm going to presume it's Persian. Johar, Gohar or Johar, depending on how you pronounce the G. That literally means watered, right? So it's saying that the best of these swords that he encountered, the blades he encountered, was this Indian sword. Yes. I'm presuming the original language might have said something like Al Hind or Hindwan or Hindwani, something like this.
Right.
So it says was the Hindi sword and the most lustrous Johardar. So it's been the most beautiful watering was from the Indian sword. That's what he's saying.
It's high praise, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And it's an early one. It's a very early manuscript, you know.
Yes. I said this guy was. Let's see. Was another one? He's around the 10th, between the 8th and the 10th century, I believe, as that guy. And this is from Al-Masudi from the 10th century. As for the iron, and those for those who are unaware, 10th century means in the 900s, in the Common Era, AD. Yeah. So, as for the iron found in India and Sind is.
Right, so India, just imagine it's a triangle like this when you look on the map. Mm-hmm. On the, sorry, I think the camera's zooming on me. So just imagine a big V. On the top left, it's Pakistan, and the region below it to the left would be the Sindh province. So it's an area. So think of Sindh. How some of you guys might hear the term Khorasan.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So ancestral India bordered current day Iran. How Pakistan does. Pakistan never existed before, right? Pakistan was technically India. My ancestry is from that side, right? And we bordered that region, right? So Sindh you could class as a province, right? It's as you kind of could say it's a small Deccan, right? Like Khorasan is a region as well, right? So these are you can class it as a region. So it's a region, and it's quite a dry region as well. Yeah. So that's what Sindh is. So Sindh is a province. That's probably the best way to explain it. Yeah.
So basically northeast of India.
Yeah, northeast. Yeah, kind of where current day Pakistan is on the bottom side.
Yep.
Pakistan.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that.
Yep.
Right. So it's known. As for the iron found in India and Sindh, it is the best iron, and it is known as Indian iron or al-Hindi. The iron found in Hind has unique properties, and it shows lines like waves or running water on its surface. So we're having in the 900s AD here, we're having these accounts of the watering pattern. So
this is like several hundred years before a lot of the common swords we see today, right? A lot of the Persian shamshirs or the Indian talwars or the Indian shamshirs or the different weapons we see, the daggers, khanjars, and peshkabs. Most of the ones you see today are, the vast majority, like 99% of them or more, are not from that time. They're from 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, right? So you're talking a huge step back in time. So we're
talking about at least a millennia of watered steel, and not just watered steel, but it was so unique that they wrote about it as if there was nothing else like it.
No. Yeah, there's that one account of the British officer going to Khorasan. What was his name again? From Delhi. He bought the blade in Delhi, and he bought the blade in Delhi, and the Khan, meaning chieftain.
Okay, that was Abbott.
Yeah, Abbott. Yeah, so Abbott bought a watered blade, talwar or shamshir from Delhi.
Yep, that's right.
And he travels to Khorasan. And in Khorasan is Persia, so the region in Persia. Yep. And the Khan, he says, this Khan was giving him his horse as well as sitting with the horse for this particular Indian sword, right? So this Persian guy, Khan doesn't mean what we think it does. Khan means the chieftain. So this guy was like the chief of his clan, right? So that's what the way the British and the guys would use this term is they would say Khan meaning as he's the Khan. He's the leader. He's the chieftain. So this chieftain of this clan, of this crew in Khorasan was willing to give his horse, which in my opinion was probably worth more than the sword, right? Because horses weren't they're expensive, right? He was giving his horse with all the fittings and offering it to Abbott for his Indian sword. So and he's in Khorasan where they should be making similar swords, right? So that was an interesting account as well. That's a British account. And again, it does. There's a lot of. I'm starting to realize there's a lot of praise for Indian steel. There's a lot of praise for Indian steel. It's kind of talking up the steel quite a lot, but there must have been reasons for it.
Yeah.
Right? Well, there was on that now. I mean, we've talked about Frenchmen. We talked about Englishmen. We've talked about Arabs, Persians. So it's quite interesting, right? When you think about it.
Oh, it is remarkably interesting. Yeah. So let's see. Let's move on to this is in the 10th century, 98 Bin Hokal. Yeah, in India, iron is made in such a way that it produces visible patterns like waves or ripples on the surface of the metal. This iron is like no other. As it is known for its exceptional properties and aesthetic value, this iron is called Hindwani and is highly sought after throughout the lands from Persia to the far regions of the West. That's same. We're seeing the same thread going along, talking about the it being very sought after and it being beautiful, and also being sharp and cutting like nothing else. So very, very interesting there.
There's a lot of strong testimonies, right? A lot of strong.
Oh, it
testimonies.
is.
You know, it kind of it's impressing me. I need to go and buy a Wootz blade or something. It's making me want to buy one now. Or shall I go and make one? I'm not sure.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. All right. So next guy is Al-Kindi, who you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And he was
really well-known historian.
Well known. He was a polymath. So, mathematics, science, philosophy, he wrote about it all. A remarkable guy. Would have been great to know him. But he wrote this is in the 9th century, earlier time period. Serendib or Ceylon swords are divided into 4 types. He wrote a treatise on a kind of a document on swords, on weapons, where they were made, who made them, where they got their steel from, etc. And this is what this is quoted from. He said they're divided into 4 types: Alnay, which are forged in Serendib. Now, Serendib or Ceylon, that's Sri Lanka.
Serendib. Serendib is Sri Lanka, or Ceylon, what it was originally known as. We call it now Sri Lanka. Pull me back on this point, because I need to make a point about Serendib as well.
Okay, sure. So the Khurasania, from the steel of which is brought from Serendib but forged in Khorasan. That's a very interesting point.
Yeah, that's similar to we just talked about Khorasan just a second. Right?
Yeah. So they're actually naming blades named after Khorasan, forged out of Indian steel. So also the Mansuria, the steel of which is brought from Serendib but forged in Mansura, and the Persian, the steel of which is brought from Serendib but forged in Persia. All of these are all the types of swords which are made from manufactured iron. From steel, and the word he used was fulad.
Yeah. This is important, right? Because
look,
one Al-Kindi is hugely respected, right, throughout the different, hugely referenced, because he didn't just talk about Wootz steel or fulad. He talked about lots of different topics, and people can Google that about Al-Kindi and Al-Biruni, right?
Yeah.
But Serendib is Sri Lanka, and the main language spoken there. There is another small language dialect that is spoken there, but the main language is Tamil. And Tamil was a big language spoken in Hyderabad and other areas around that region in the Deccan, right? And so there's a big large Tamil community. Tamil meaning the Tamil speaking community in Sri Lanka, right? You hear about the civil unrest in Sri Lanka over the last 10-15 years, what it's been. So it does, the borders weren't as defined as they are now. So there's a high possibility that some of that steel that was being produced in Serendib, some of it might have been coming out from Tamil regions up in southern India, because Hyderabad and the Deccan it generally isn't very far from these regions, right? And I know Serendib and these other Sri Lankan, there were ports there that ships would leave from as well. So there would be shipping ports. So we know that there was different routes going into, there was the Silk Route. We talked about the Silk Route, and people know about the Silk Route. The Kabul in Afghanistan of trade, Damascus in Syria. In Syria, you talk about going through Oman and through Persia, to the bazaars of the Persian and Middle Eastern countries, right? So there was lots of different trade routes, but for this particular account is talking about most likely ingots being moved by ship,
right?
Because it would be very unprofitable if they left from Serendib into India, going up North India, going all the way through land. It just wouldn't make sense. So they would ship it.
Yeah, it definitely does make sense. What you're saying there.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see what else we have. Last one is basically from this is from the 9th century, 800s. So we're looking at Al-Kindi also. Iron which is not natural or is steel or fulad. It means the refined or purified. It is made of natural iron by adding to it while smelting some ingredients for purifying it and for decreasing its softness until it becomes strong, flexible, susceptible to heat, treatment, and until its ferind appears.
There you go. The term
that's ferind. The watering, the pattern.
Yeah. So that's 801. So that's an early That's an
Mhm.
early reference, right? So for them, that makes sense.
Same
Right?
document from Al Kindi there,
Yeah.
and so this is what's interesting here is that he is identifying the steel from southern India,
Mm.
from the tip from Ceylon, um,
Which is the
Serendib,
furthest, which is technically the furthest
with
point, right?
watered
Yeah.
steel. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
with
Yeah.
watered steel. So he's saying that it had water, and that Foulard. It's interesting here also. He's saying that the Foulard that he's talking about, all this stuff that is being made into swords, was what he was talking about, is actually it has a pattern. It's
Mm.
Foulard, it's purified steel, and it has a pattern. It has Farind. So
That's right. Yeah.
that's it's an important thing. So that goes back to when we're talking about Tavernier, when he
Yeah.
said that the only steel that could be Damascene was, could produce a good Damascene, was the stuff from Golconda. There was something about the quality of the pattern from there, but that doesn't mean that there was no pattern in the Persian stuff, because, well, he's saying here in the 9th century that it did.
Yeah. 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 So
So,
I think the evidence and the references mentioned here clearly state that watering was being achieved from much earlier than the common uh, references of antiques we see today, right? So,
yeah,
and we have to, if it weren't for these references, and these references are from non-Indian, non-Indian natives, they're native to different countries outside of India,
correct.
and these are scholars in their own right, and so from different backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, different countries, and they're kind of they're singing from the same hymn sheet, really.
Exactly.
What they're saying is, yeah, what they're saying, which is weird, right? Which
Yeah.
is impressive as well.
Yes, it is.
That they're saying that India produces high quality watered steel. It had patterning. It was known by these different terms. So we've seen a bunch of terms being used. We've seen Johar, Johardar. We've seen Farand.
That's
We've
right.
seen Polad. We've seen Al Hind, Hindwani, Hind. There's there's a lot of references there that is saying that wood steel was being made for a very, very long time in India. There is some account. Some people argue that Southern Indian steel wasn't having patterning or water patterning, but obviously the statements here are clearly saying they were, and I know they were anyway. There's a lot of historical blades that say that,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yes, there are.
yeah, it's interesting, right? I think it's
And even
really,
the ingots themselves show that they were slow solidified and had a pattern. And we'll cover
yeah,
that in our next episode.
yeah.
But before we go, Jin, can you just say a few words about your experience? Because I know that you you have a very unusual kind of history with Woots. You've been playing around with it since you were, knee high to an anvil.
You put me on the spot now. You put me on the spot. What do you want to know? What do you want to know quickly?
Well, just your when was your first experience with Woots, and also just so the people listening have some understanding of your experience with swords. How many swords have you dealt with over the years, and
Oh,
a
right.
bit
Okay.
about what you do. Just very
All
quickly,
right.
we've got about 5 minutes.
Okay. I don't want this to be about me, but I'll be quick, right? So you put me on the spot now, but I'm going to be quick. Woots since very, very young. Late 40s, few years off 50 now. My grandfather, blacksmith, bladesmith, old smith from the old ways. Ancestry was in that side of India, which current day Pakistan. And I eventually got involved in wood steel. It wasn't really planned. It wasn't something that I probably wanted to be an astronaut or something. I don't know, right? And I started getting involved in it. Antique blades since a very, very young age. I'm practicing Sikh. I'm a practicing Sikh. I carry a blade with me, a small gard or a long one all the time. So blades, edged weapons have been part of my life for a long time. Restoration wise, I've been doing it for a long time. I mean, it's funny when I hear people say that they've handled so many swords in museums and things like this. Like it doesn't compare.
Yeah.
It doesn't compare to the amount of swords I've handled. It's just incredible. I mean, I don't know, famous Persian smith, Asadullah. I've done hundreds, if not hundreds. I can't begin to count how many I've done, like how many I've restored, how many I've repaired, how many I've tested. Countless. So it's probably thousands, I would have thought. We used to do so many each month and get them out and all the time. So I've done a lot of stuff around that.
Right.
I've kind of slowed down a bit now. I've slowed down a bit. I'm trying to concentrate a bit more on what I want to do. So I want to do a bit more smithing. Restoration work took me away from wood steel for obvious reasons. I needed to feed the family and needed to work, right? So, and as you probably know, the testing and investment in wood steel, especially what I get up to, and those who know me, and you know me,
yes,
right?
Very well.
Yeah. You waste hundreds, if not thousands of pounds on doing this stuff, right?
It's easy to do.
Yeah, easy to do. And the testing, the amount of hours you spend in the workshop, how many hours you forge, how many hours you're in the lab testing, scientific testing. You know, I had to learn science and I hated science. Right? So, but yeah, I've been doing it for a long time. I got a lot of respect for it. I got a lot of respect for all the different cultures and all the different people involved, you know, so.
Because your grandfather used to make woots, didn't he?
Yeah. He used to make woots, he used to forge it. A lot of the stuff that I shared with the community early on, several years back, was all that I learned from my grandfather.
Yeah.
Or
cool.
I learned it after my grandfather died via my mom.
Yeah.
So my mom remembers a lot of stuff she used to tell me and say, "Oh, I remember your grandfather doing this." Like, hold on, I haven't tried that. Let me try that. So I'd try it, and then going back to traditional forging methods. Like, look, this is probably not the video for it, and we probably got a little bit of time, but going back to the traditional methods of forging, it just made everything it proved me wrong and my grandfather right. So I was trying to modernize everything, you know, watching stuff that's happening on YouTube and TV, and like, oh, I need that machine. I don't know why I need it, but I want it, you know. And I wasted so much time doing these things, and I've just gone back to the old ways of doing things. You know, just a charcoal forge, fluxing, and a hammer, and nothing compares to it. It obviously takes longer, but the outcome, it's uncomparable. You can't compare it. It's the patterning and the quality of steel that I have now. It's just, you can't compare the quality. So it's the old way. The old guys were right. I was wrong. You know, the modern ways of doing things. It's just keep traditional. And this is why these kind of videos, the historical stuff, is important. So
Thanks, Gene, I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing a bit about yourself. Well, that's it for this episode, and we appreciate you watching. Thank you, Jin, for your time, and look forward to getting together for episode number 2, where we cover a few other very interesting topics about wood steel and its patterning, and where it was found in India, etc. So until next time, thank you very much, and goodbye.
The hammer asked the anvil, and she had once agreed that they should meet together in the way that I decreed. And it's sparks are flying, passion strong. I am the blacksmith singing the hammer and the anvil song. And it's sparks are flying, passion strong. I am the blacksmith singing the hammer and the anvil song.